Hello again, I am Theo, and this video is part of Stage 1 Youth Leadership Training of the European Youth Connection Program. In the previous video, we talked about what facilitators are, what are their responsibilities, as well as different styles of facilitation. In this one, let's go take a deeper look into what tools a facilitator might use, as well in what situations they might choose to use it.
So let's start with general tools, things that are useful to have and practice in most, if not all situations while acting as a facilitator. Starting with active listening. For those not familiar with it, active listening is listening to understand, paying attention to the speaker's verbal and non-verbal communication, and repeating to them what you received in order to eliminate assumptions and make sure everyone is on the same page. As you can imagine, this is a very useful tool not only for when facilitating group processes, but for when communicating with stakeholders about what the goals and requirements of the activity are. Similarly, communication models like Gordon model or NVC. More ways to ensure a clear communication with no misunderstandings or accidental triggering of negative emotions. Now, this one might sound a bit silly, but I find it very important, and it's voice work. There are many times that you will have to talk a lot as a facilitator, and often in rooms with 30 or 40 people or more. You need to know not only how to be heard, but how not to create strain and damage to your voice. Critical thinking, not only useful when doing research and session design, but important when mediating and resolving conflicts or moderating discussions. Asking the right questions to move a discussion forward, separating actions from assumptions in a conflict, ensuring that the material you provide is factually correct are all things that are part of the job description. Which leads me to awareness and observational skills. Most of human communication is non-verbal, and you need to be able to discern the energy of the group, if there are individuals who are having trouble participating, or if group dynamics are turning negative in order to be able to intervene and steer the situation to desired outcomes. And finally, and most importantly, adaptability. From weather changes and not working equipment to last-minute cancellations, everything that can go wrong most likely will. So it's important to always have a backup plan or be able to adapt on the fly. Moving on to tools for setting up and managing group dynamics. Icebreaker games, not only for getting people in the group more familiar with each other, but to also encourage participation by getting people to take the first step and speak in front of the group. On the other hand, team building exercises are there to establish the group identity and dynamics. During team building exercises, individuals find the roles and functions they can fulfill in the group, while also identifying the ones that people around them excel at. Doing activities in small, often rotating groups allows for a more immediate and organic connection between group members by giving them the opportunity to interact and work with individuals that they might not have the chance to otherwise. Using the group's shared experience of the activities in order to enhance and strengthen the existing group dynamics. This can be done by having the group reflect on their actions during the activity, analyzing successes, and brainstorming solutions for failures. Paired listening is a method for bringing everyone's ideas and opinions together in a setting where power is more equalized than in larger groups. Participants are split into pairs, where each person actively listens to the other and does not express their own opinion, sometimes taking notes, and then they swap over. Conflict resolution and mediation skills are really important, not only to ease and better the experience of the participants in conflict, but also not to allow the conflict to spread and sour group dynamics. Which leads me to multipartiality. We have talked about facilitators needing to be neutral, but what we mean by that is not be a detached entity existing to fulfill a function. A facilitator needs to be able to understand and side with everyone's position, while of course being aware that power is not always balanced equally. Next is engagement and motivation tools. Okay, I know that snacks and refreshments might sound silly, but honestly, how many times have you gone to an event that you weren't that passionate about, just because they had food and drinks, and ended up liking the event anyway? Food gets people through the door, and then you can use the rest of your arsenal to get them interested and engaged with the content. And a big part of that arsenal is energizers. Energizers are small, quick activities, often silly games, used to raise the energy level and focus of the group before the activity. Energizers often involve movement and rules that are meant to keep participants on their toes, like when you hear this sound, you must make that movement, etc. Which leads us to activities with movement. Most people spend the majority of their day in a sitting position, so incorporating reasons to stand up and do in your activities can make them really interesting and refreshing for your participants. Of course, this should be done with purpose and consideration towards the participants. There is nothing interesting about making people walk in circles for 45 minutes. And speaking of walking for 45 minutes, you need to be aware of timing and pacing. From not having multiple physically demanding activities one after another, to not having lectures and presentations right after lunchtime, you need to consider how your activities flow and build up to one another to make sure participants do not get burned out or bored. Moving on to when in doubt, play a game. Games not only help create stakes for an activity, but also incorporate all of the things we talked about before, like rules to increase focus, movement, and pacing. Finally, a great way to increase motivation is making sure that everyone feels heard. By supporting divergence and convergence of views, you allow everyone's voice to be heard and considered when making a collective decision. This way you engage every member of the group instead of just the vocal majority. Tools for discussion moderation. A go-round is literally going around in the circle of participants, offering everyone a chance to speak and offer something to the discussion. It is helpful to give a chance to speak to people who didn't get the opportunity to, as well as allowing them time to formulate what they wanted to say. A parking space could be a piece of paper or part of a whiteboard where conversation topics that emerge from a discussion but do not contribute to its purpose are written in order to be touched upon at a later time. For example, while discussing the marketing strategy for an event, a conversation about color theory might emerge and spark the interest of participants, but as it's not the point of the discussion, it should be written down in the parking space to be discussed later. Okay, let me start by saying that the talking stick doesn't have to be an actual stick. Any easily discernible item, whether it's a plushie, tennis ball, colorful marker, etc., that is passed around to show who is the person who is currently speaking while the rest of the group listens, is a talking stick. This method is great to minimize interruptions and back and forths during a discussion, especially with younger participants. The fishbowl is another discussion moderation method in which participants form two circles, a smaller inner circle and a bigger outer one. Participants in the inner circle are having a discussion, while the participants in the outer circle are listening and keeping notes. When the discussion is not leading anywhere or losing momentum, the facilitator switches a person from the inner circle with someone from the outer circle to offer feedback on what has been discussed so far and reignite the discussion. Framing is setting the context, boundaries, and direction for a discussion. The wording and tone used influence the way the group develops. Asking for concerns rather than fears is one example. But too tight a boundary can limit the growth of the group and thus create conflict as people break out of the framing that was set. Finally, summarizing is a way to ensure that everyone is on the same page, as well as offer a moment of reflection on the things discussed up to that point. And now, the meat and potatoes of facilitation, learning process tools. I'm going to start with, admittedly my favorite, experiential learning. Experiential learning is essentially learning by doing. Connecting lived experience and actions with knowledge not only makes the process more engaging, but also makes it harder to forget said knowledge. Enabling full participation isn't just making sure everyone spoke during a go-around or going through and making sure everyone did the thing. Enabling full participation is about being aware that everyone participates in different ways and capacities, and allowing them to do so in order for the group's process and decisions to feel owned by all. A debrief is a discussion that takes place following a shared task, activity, decision, or action. It can be used, for example, to analyze what was done successfully and what was not, or to explore what was learned at the group or individual level. In turn, reflection groups are a way for participants to discuss their learning process and takeaways from the activity in small groups. By discussing in small groups, participants can inspire and offer new perspective on each other's reflections. Which leads me to gallery report back, where instead of asking your reflection group to present their discussion and conclusions, you ask them to prepare a flip chart summarizing their discussion and place it somewhere in the room. This encourages groups to identify key conclusions that can be clearly understood by people who weren't part of the discussion. Everyone else wanders around in their own rhythm and takes in the flipchart gallery. One person from each group may stay next to their flipchart in order to answer any clarifying questions. Finally, throwing it back is the act of taking a question aimed at the facilitator and instead aiming it at the group. Remember that the facilitator is not an expert at the subject, but there to assist and guide the group process. So by throwing the question back at the group, not only do you increase engagement, but also encourage the group to take ownership of their actions and learning. Moving on to brainstorming and problem-solving tools. A Word Cafe or Idea Storm is an activity where you divide the subject you want to discuss into separate aspects of it and prepare stations with papers and pens for each aspect. Then you split your participants into small groups equal to the amount of aspects and place one in each station. Small groups are then invited to discuss, propose, and write down solutions on the papers on the station. After an allocated amount of time, rotate the groups to the next station. Repeat until the groups end up on their original stations. A reverse brainstorming session is an activity where instead of trying to find a solution to an issue, for example, you are proposing ways to make it worse. It is a way to add humor and change of perspective to problem solving. Forum theater is a problem-solving method where participants act out the story of a problem to the rest of the group, who, when they have an idea on how things could have been done differently, jump in, take the appropriate role, and let the action flow from there. Similar to supporting divergence and convergence of views, supporting mainstreams and margins means embracing and giving attention to the potential merit of all proposed solutions, no matter how popular they might be. Lastly, when it is useful for the group to have an indication of what everyone is thinking on a subject, a straw poll or show of hands can be used as a test of opinion. What is important is that it is not a vote and thus not decisive. For more nuanced polling, colored cards showing red for no, green for yes, and yellow for more discussion is needed can be used. Finally, on a project about virtual exchanges, it would be remiss for us not to mention digital and online tools that can be used for facilitation. Starting with online whiteboards such as Miro, Mural, Stormboard, and FigJam, virtual space tools such as Spatial, Gather, Wello, used to create a feeling of being in the same space even if the activity is online, tools to boost engagement such as Mentimeter, Slido, and Kahoot, of course, tools for video conferencing such as Discord, Zoom, Google Meets, and Microsoft Teams, scheduling tools such as Calendly, Google Calendar, and SimplyMeet to organize your online activities, presentation tools like PowerPoint, Canva, and Visme to make, yep, you guessed it, presentations, learning platforms such as Padlet, LearnWords, Nearpod, and Teachable to organize your material and have it easily accessible by participants, and survey tools like Google Forms, Typeform, and SurveyMonkey to gather data and make collective decisions. Obviously, these are not the only tools a facilitator can use, and since you've reached the end of the video, I would like to invite you to write on the Discord channel any other tools you believe a facilitator could use that we didn't mention. Anything from digital tools and platforms to activities is fine, as long as you can tell us how it could be used. Have fun and see you soon!